My name is Helen Shoemaker, and I did my final project over Lindsay Corporation. It's a company that's headquartered right here in Omaha, Nebraska. It was started in the 1950s by Paul Zimmer when he created his small farm and equipment business. The major thing that his sons did in the 1960s was create the first Zimmatic center pivot. In the 70s, they created a long span irrigation system which helped farmers stay out of their field. In the 90s, they integrated technology into this system, which allowed farmers to program the exact amount of water, chemicals, and the irrigation chemicals and fertilizer that needs to be put on their crops. In 2001-2003, they acquired several companies. One was in the U.S., one was in Brazil, and they also opened their own South African manufacturing plant. They began operations in China in 2005. And 2006 was a big year for Lindsay. They stepped into a new industry, and that's the construction machinery industry. Currently, Lindsay manufactures the removable barriers, train products, and the signage that you see during construction season on the highways. In the recent years, they have really focused on acquiring companies that will help them saturate this market. Some of the strengths of Lindsay is that they have increased dividends by 28%. Liquidity, solvency, and profitability and asset management ratios are over here. Solvency and liquidity measure how well a company deals with its debt. Solvency is long-term, liquidity is short-term. One thing I want you to know with solvency ratios is that Lindsay does use debt to finance its new growth, which could be a bad thing or it could be a good thing. In Lindsay's case, it is a good thing because they are making enough revenue from these investments to cover the cost of using debt. Liquidity, the big thing that I want you to realize is that overall, Lindsay is performing really well compared to other competitors in the market. But Lindsay doesn't have a huge difference between its current and quick ratio, which means that they don't have a whole lot of inventory included in their liquid assets. This helps the company if sales were to dip unexpectedly. The company would still be able to manage its short-term debts. Profitability ratios, just take a look at this. Overall, the company is outperforming the industry by a mile. The one thing I would like to point out is the return on equity. The industry average is 15, whereas Lindsay's performing at about 19. It's performing at 19.41, which means they're making about $4.41 more than the industry average per dollar of equity. Moving on to some other strengths, the Middle Eastern contract that Lindsay has accepted is a $39 million contract that none of the revenues have been recognized of this season, and they will be recognized in the later part of 2013-2014. There's also a backlog of unfulfilled contracts that's up 87% compared to last quarter. The only thing to note about that is people don't like to wait for their products, so that could hurt the Lindsay's reputation if they don't produce those as fast as they need to. Some weaknesses of the company is its seasonality. Lindsay's main seasons, as far as infrastructure, is during the summer months and also farming in the spring and summer, so they overlap a lot during the third quarter and leaving the first quarter very slow. One thing that Value Line did suggest that revenue may be being recognized at inappropriate times, which is against general accounting principles, but it also pulls revenues from future time periods that would help increase those revenues at that time and help change the numbers for Lindsay's bottom line. One thing to notice, though, is their infrastructure division isn't doing too well. It consistently loses about 15% sales every year. Some opportunities that Lindsay needs to take advantage of is that drought conditions in the United States this year have actually helped them. It made farmers realize that they need steady irrigation systems to make sure that their crops are getting enough water. Developing countries are developing their infrastructure, and these products that Lindsay produces are in great need. The only thing that Lindsay needs to realize is that they have to make their products cost effectively enough that they can make a bid for these contracts and win them. One other thing that is a pretty big thing for Lindsay is Europe is now putting a standard safety, or standardizing their safety on the roads. So instead of being able to contract with just one area, they will be able to contract with several countries to do their infrastructure, to use their infrastructure products. Then we're moving on to threats. One thing that the USDA predicted that there will be a lower demand for agricultural commodities, which will hurt Lindsay's big producer, their irrigation division. One thing that they need to realize about this is their customer service needs to be aware, because people aren't going to be buying as many new systems, and they're just going to want to maintain their older ones. There's also some tight purse strings in the government as far as when you're marketing for infrastructure. Most of your buyers are governments. So with the economic downturn, it's important to realize that you have to be extremely cost effective when you're putting in bids, and making sure that those bids are low enough that you can beat out your competitors. Overall, my recommendations for Lindsay, especially for their infrastructure, is to realize that they need to analyze the business, decide whether it's worth keeping, and if it is, then they need to make sure that they are cutting costs where they can, that they're making a quality and effective product that new developing countries can afford to use, and also bids in Europe that they are in line with the other competitors that they are going against. As far as seasonality, one thing that Lindsay could do to help balance out their year is use a discount shipping during their first quarter. If they did this, they would be able to they would be able to up their revenue during this time, and companies that are contracting them would like the discount for the shipping with gas prices rising. As far as the irrigation system, as I said, the government purse strings are tight, and they need to make sure, where Lindsay's commodities are going to go down in price, people aren't going to buy as many new systems. They're going to want to update their old ones. One thing they could do is create an update that would allow farmers to update their machinery without having to buy a new system. Also, the customer service representatives need to be aware of this problem. That way they are trained effectively to handle matters. Finally, when talking about Lindsay's market value, one thing that they could consider doing is to do a split stock or a split dividend. Although this would initially lower the price of their stock, it would also up the number of shares that they had. Lindsay's stock would then be easier to buy for the average investor.